Hi, you guys. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're coming back, welcome back. If it's your first time, I'm so happy that you're finding my channel. My name is Allie Wilkins. I am a priestess, teacher, oracle, seer, mentor, etc. And essentially, I'm obsessed with the ancient feminine. This is the way that I refer to her as well as helping people really step into their soul blueprint. So that's what this whole channel is about. Today, we're going to talk about the dark feminine and something that I think is missing from every community that talks about the dark feminine. I haven't heard anyone talk about this before, but it's vital for us to understand this so we actually know like why we're working with her or what her true purpose is. So I think this is going to be really interesting for you. This is how all of my students usually respond to it. So I hope you enjoy the video. So today we're going to be talking about the dark feminine, of course. We're in dark feminine season, but we're going to talk about who she is in her mastery, like what that tangibly looks like and what it looked like 4,000 years ago, how she would have been operating during that time frame. And this is really important because it gives us an actual perspective of how we can be tangibly working with the dark feminine. It's not just to reclaim our wholeness. This is the beginning part of it. And this is a massively important part. However, once we've reclaimed her, like she had a job on her own. So there's multiple parts of this that I'm not hearing anybody else talk about. So I hope that this will be interesting and inspiring and exciting for you to listen to. Usually that's kind of the response I get from looking at her in this perspective. P.S. I'm coming from Avalon today, so there's also Glastonbury, England. It's the heart chakra of the world. So it's also interesting that I'm going to be in England while I'm going to be teaching this round of Realm of the Dark Feminine that's starting in a week. Doors will close in 2 weeks. It's interesting because it's coming in with this higher heart frequency as well that is supporting what I'm going to be talking to you about, the mastery of the dark feminine. Who is the dark feminine in her PhD? We're working with the dark feminine collectively, and most feminine communities are working with the dark feminine in her kindergarten, max first grade, like comprehension levels. And we just get to elevate this so much. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation. So, who was the dark feminine 4,000 years ago? She hadn't yet been controlled or programmed by the patriarchy. The patriarchy was just coming to really tangibly rise and it was starting to affect her, but she hadn't been programmed. She didn't have the good girl program. She was operating in all aspects of her femininity fully and without constriction. So she didn't have a lot of these limitations that we might have today because we have been programmed and we have to get rid of that programming first before we can actually do the job of the dark feminine. So I'm gonna teach this. I teach this from the perspective of the Serpent Priestess archetype in Realm of the Dark Feminine. There would have been many different types of Serpent Priestesses who are working with different categories of healing. Some literally would be working with serpents in terms of healing, in terms of almost like plant medicine as well, using snake venom. Don't do this at home. Using snake venom as a way to access higher dimensions, higher realms, sort of like we might use mushrooms or something of that nature. Again, don't do that at home. Also, serpents could be used to predict um, earth movements, earthquakes, and things like that. They would keep snakes in these great pits and they would watch the movements of the snakes to see how they would respond. And if this was utilized a lot of times in places that were more prone to dangerous situations that the earth could create, like earthquakes or tsunamis or things of that nature. Also, this could have just literally been working with the cyclical aspects of life and transformation. What I'm going to be talking about is a serpent priestess in her highest state. So this would have been like the woman in her priestess cult that was the most masterful. She probably would have been the high priestess. she would have mastered all of the different aspects of what it takes to be a serpent priestess. But also, I teach this archetype in the Venus Temple and in Realm of the Dark Feminine because I see the serpent priestess in this form as being the highest form of mastery of the dark feminine and our Venusian energies. So ultimately, she's the most masterful form of feminine energy altogether. So this is an archetype that is really powerful for us to learn how to work with. Utilizing an archetype like this gives us a directional point to understand what's actually possible for us and what the actual purpose of our feminine energy is outside of ourselves. Because we're not just meant to be in our feminine energy so we can attract a masculine man, or so we can be beautiful and magnetic and radiant, or so we can just live like a lazy girl life, which all of those things sign me up. But like, it goes so much further beyond that. Because those of us who signed up in terms of soul contracts to come back and be here, we're not just here for ourselves. We're also here because we have contracts with the collective to raise societal consciousness once again. So, anyways, so the Serpent Priestess. So, like I was saying, this would have been the High Priestess. She would have been one of the most masterful beings her in her group, and they called priestesses cults, which doesn't mean the same thing that it means today. This woman would have essentially been seen as being incredibly valuable. I'm going to be talking about the Serpent Priestess probably around 2500 BC, maybe 2000 BC, what would have been happening, maybe even 1500 BC, this sort of time range, 1,000 year period. During this time, the patriarchy would have been rising, but it wouldn't have been like in full-fledged effect yet. That's a good way to kind of measure time is Jesus Christ, Yeshua. When he was alive, the patriarchy had already come into full effect. 500 years before, they had already destroyed the last goddess temple. So there's no goddess temple standing. They had destroyed all of that. That had happened 500 years prior. It wasn't to the effect that it is today. However, it was very strongly rooted. So 2,000 years before that, or 1,500 years before that, what was happening was a slow takeover. First, they started just kind of like downgrading the power and the reverence that was offered towards priestesses, towards women in general. But priestesses were held with higher reverence because they were representations of the goddess. They were the earthly embodiments of the goddess and they served the goddess. Priests are supposed to be serving God, but they're serving a patriarchal God, so it's not comparable. If that offends you, this is not the channel for you. I don't have anything against true Christianity, but I do have major issues with patriarchal religion because they have programmed us to diminish ourselves of our full power. That is one of the strongest ways that we have been taught to give away and suppress our power. So I talk about that a lot on this channel, and I talk about this a lot in my work and in some of my master classes if you want to check any of them out. Some are free, some are paid. Anyway, so during this time frame, the priestesses wouldn't have had the same allowance of power that they used to have, and eventually they would have been removed from their roles. And for example, instead of working in certain forms of healing, they might be taken to a brothel that was owned by the church, or they might have been tortured, removed from their position. So eventually most priestesses were not able to operate in their prior role, or if they were being abused. They weren't being offered what they needed and they were being taken advantage of. And the profit was then going to the church. It was not going to back into the temple to nourish and steward the priestesses who were doing all of this work, or for the goddess herself. So, or for like upkeep of the temple, things like that. So eventually, when all the priestesses had been removed or just were being treated horribly, the kings and the men of these nations decided that they weren't valuable anymore, and so we were going to get rid of all of them. However, the high priestesses, they could still recognize their value because these are people who oftentimes had grown up or weren't that far distant from earth-based religions from honoring the feminine. They weren't that far off from it. They had just been indoctrinated pretty recently or a few generations back into a patriarchal religion. So they remembered the old ways and they saw the value in these high priestesses. And so what would happen a lot of the time is the high priestess would be saved. She would serve as, and this would differ how this would happen based on the time range, but she would be serving as either the consort to the king, so she would marry him and be queen, or or she would be his advisor. And a lot of times there would be serpent priestesses as advisors and oracles, and the king would have a wife. And there can be stuff there as well if you hold the serpent priestess in your past lifetimes. But all of us can work with this as an archetype to activate in our embodiment. And so here's what she would do. Her job was to advise the king, but her real job as a priestess was to steward and protect civilization. It was to steward and protect not only the consciousness of civilization, but also actual people's lives, the nourishment, the protection of the land, things of this nature. So what she would be doing is she would have that in the back of her head, but she also had to work with this incredibly patriarchal king who was all about greed, conquest, pillaging, getting as much as he could to make himself look like a good king, filling the ego. And she had to understand how to navigate his ego without having him become triggered by anything that she was offering or reflecting, anything she was advising to him. She had to understand how to work with his own darkness. And I teach this way. If you guys have seen the movie Dune, the Bene Gesserit in the movie Dune are just like the Serpent Priestesses. And I do think in the movie Dune, they have a little bit more of a malicious intent, but it's also like they're trying to protect space and planets in the movie from all of these men just destroying life itself. That's underneath it all. That's what they're trying to do. And they're trying to preserve humanity essentially so that these men who have power now over space don't destroy everything as they have destroyed the earth. So it's a really good movie to kind of when you watch the first one and the second one, you can kind of see like how they're operating with men. And the Serpent Priestess in her highest energy, this is the only way that I teach. I don't teach about manipulation. I don't teach about this is often how the dark feminine is represented, and that is a wounded aspect of her. That's like if you're showing up with her from a space of woundedness, that's what she would do. I don't teach in that way, and you should not work with those frequencies because you're going to accrue karma. Because anybody who's interacting with you when you're acting from that wounded state, you're accruing karma with them that you're going to have to pay off later in another lifetime. So over here, we're not trying to accrue anything else, right? So, anyways, the serpent priestess would have to learn how to work with him, how to essentially be in the space of someone who is permeated by demons of greed, conquest, pillaging, just absolute ego. If you think about some of the kings that we might have more understanding of, like from the 1600s or the 1700s, or like, King Louis, the husband of Marie Antoinette, that's how I would probably refer to him as. But like these people who are just grotesque in their ego identification, just the ego cannot get bigger. That's the type of energy she would have had to be working with and be gracious towards. Because also, if he decided that he didn't like her, you're out and you're also dead. Or maybe even you're out and your whole priestess cult is out. Maybe I protected your priestess group because you're here, but now that I have no use for you, like the stakes were very high. And so in today's day and age, what this really looks like, actually put a pin in that for a second. So what she was doing is the Venusian art of taming demons. And I've talked about when I was promoting and talking about the Venus temple. Venus is known as the mother of demons. And everybody's like, "What?" Like she's like this beautiful, radiant, magnetic, mesmerizing, alluring, enchanting being. Why would she ever be called the mother of demons? And it's because one of her skill sets is working with her demons. So essentially, they become an army for her. And another thing that the church did was train us all to think that demons are outside of us. They are not. They are our internal limitations, our internal belief systems that don't serve us, that keep us shackled. They are the programs that live within us that we attach um, significance to, usually that are not helping us in any capacity. So, what Venus would do is she would notice when a demon arose within her. So, for example, jealousy, or for example, doubt, or something of that nature. And she would, instead of being like, you're an ugly emotion, I don't want to see you, you're an ugly demon, I don't want to look at you. And there's actually a book about this called Feeding Your Demons, I think. I haven't read it, but I've heard good things about it. Um, and it's like you want to, the Venus would sit down with her doubt. She would sit down with her jealousy. She would sit down with her anger or something of that nature. And instead of working with it as if it's a burden, as if it's a problem, she would sit down as if it was a friend and say, "What's going on? Tell me about what's happening. Why are you feeling this way? What is it that you need?" And jealousy is a really easy example of this, because jealousy is one of those emotions that does show up as a demon, because we're not supposed to ever showcase jealousy. Although everybody has experienced jealousy, there's many different formats that it can show up in. But when it shows up, you're not really supposed to tell people you're feeling jealous, right? That's not like acceptable in our society. So it starts to, in that shame and suppression, it will start to like become a monster almost. And this is where it's like we see these demons as being so ugly and scary looking. And Venus wouldn't even be, she would not be phased by the scariest looking demon who could possibly erupt, because she knows that it's an aspect of herself. And what she would do is she would show so much love to this. This is also, by the way, reflected in the story of Inanna and Ereshkigal, where Ereshkigal is in the underworld. She's just killed Inanna, and the gods send down flies to save Inanna, essentially. And what they do is they just listen to Inanna, and she could be seen as like the demon in this particular example, where she has just murdered her sister, and the flies basically just listen to her and witness her without judgment, and then she's like, okay, Inanna can go free. So it's the same idea. So Venus works with these demons. She raises them back through love. She raises them into a higher state of consciousness, learning what they're trying to teach her along the way. And also, she then has them work for her. So with the example of jealousy, if we would stop suppressing jealousy, we would see that it actually is trying to show us something. It's trying to give us information. Sometimes that information might not be like, it might not be that supportive, or it might not be helpful, but most of the time the information is telling you, what are you uncomfortable with? Where do you feel inadequate? Where is your insecurity a little bit loud? And where is that insecurity asking you to build confidence? This will vary based on what the jealousy might be about. But if you actually work with those demons, you can raise them into love, and then they can work for you. And they're no longer these hideous beasts. They're like people on your team that are helping you on a daily basis or whenever you need them. So the Serpent Priestess had this skill set. So essentially, she could have been placed into the darkest, most rank space on Earth, and she would not be phased by it. She would also, this is very important, she had the skill set to protect herself, but also she could still be in the situation. So she knew how to protect herself from harm, or from being in fear around the situation, but she wasn't at risk of like being siphoned off of, because she knew how to steward her frequency, and she knew how to protect herself from beings or energies that did want to siphon her energy. So, that being said, she could go into these dark spaces and permeate them with light. And it wasn't through this fake light and love bullshit that's like, a lot of times we see, like right now I'm in Glastonbury, and there's, a lot of, you can see this in any very spiritual city, Mount Shasta, Sedona. Here, there's other places across the world that I'm sure have similar energies, where there are people who are like, I'm filled with divine grace, but it's like their family structure is horrifying. Like they don't, they're like, and don't be offended if this might apply to you in some capacity. It's something we should be able to recognize and laugh at ourselves about. However, the Serpent Priestess wasn't only only holding the space of light and love consciousness. She could go into any environment and fill it with love from a grounded state of nature. So it wasn't this airy fairy woo woo bullshit. It was deeply grounded, sovereign, and powerful. So much that kings wanted her advice in a time when women were seen as nothing, where women were losing their power so incredibly. They no longer held seats of power, they no longer held titles of reverence. So they still valued her. And this is how we can start to work with this archetype. And this is what we do specifically in the last month or the last couple weeks of Realm of the Dark Feminine. We work with the Serpent Priestess because this is who she is. This is who the Dark Feminine is in her highest form of mastery, where we can permeate any space of darkness and heal it through love. Now, love also might look different than we think that it looks and we've been taught that it looks, because love is not self-sacrificing. Love is not the way that the Good Girl program has taught us what love is. It's very, very different from that. And so it's important that we reclaim our dark feminine frequencies, because if we don't even we don't get to step into that space. It is very obvious who is in their dark feminine energy and who is not. And I'm not talking about from a space of judgment, but from a space of how are you willing to witness your shadows and work with them? So if you're in your Serpent Priestess energy, even within other people, like I'm not going to tell you to go to like the elite headquarters where they're going to turn you into a reptilian, but like in your relationship, if the person is holding darkness, or if you're in an argument, can you separate your ego from yourself, understand how to read the person's energy close enough? Because remember, I said the Serpent Priestess is a master in all aspects of feminine frequency. So can you read the other person's energy to know enough? What do they actually need behind the surface of what they're saying? How can I not spiritually bypass, but how can I get to the root of what the actual issue is rather than dealing with surface level problems all day? Or dealing with this surface level issue that they're presenting, but actually it's something a lot deeper. The Serpent Priestess can scan that shit and she'll be able to address it at the root, pull it out, and fix it with love in a way that also brings love and nourishment to the other person. So there's a lot that goes into that embodiment, and I teach that in the last archetype. The last couple weeks we work with Realm of the Dark Feminine. And this is important for us to understand that, like I started talking about in the beginning of this video, we're people are talking about the dark feminine as if her only job is to bring us back into wholeness. There's a whole different, and then it's not even the dark feminine, it's the integrated aspects of mature feminine frequency. That person, that energy has its own job on the planet. So the first thing is we have to revive and repair her, if you will, within our own body. We have to bring her back to life. And within that, first, we have to learn how to work with her. We have to understand where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, where we have limitations that we don't even know about. Because you won't know about 95% of them, I promise. And I know this from doing Realm of the Dark Feminine for years and working on this frequency myself for years by myself, but also with other clients. So we have to bring awareness to how we heal that within ourselves first, step into mastery in those aspects. And then once we do that, we can slowly start engaging in more of the collective conversation. And I'm not saying that you can't do things for the collective right now. However, then your mastery is going to naturally be applied. So it's like the more you reignite your dark feminine energy, the more opportunities you're going to be given to bring that into your relationships and then into the collective. And the the purpose of the dark feminine and us all reclaiming her is look around the world. None of us are happy with the world that we see. other than, experiencing joy and the beauty and those things, when we look at how much darkness is happening, the reason that's happening is because, and has been for 2000 years, is because since the time that the dark feminine was exiled and ejected and buried, since that time, that's when all this shit has happened. The dark feminine doesn't allow that. And it's because she's buried within so many of us that this stuff is allowed to happen. So it's our job. If you want to see a different world, if you're a parent and you want to see a different world for your children, this is actually some of the most potent work that you can do. Shifting yourself will shift everything around you. And then you're also modeling that to your children. But the very important thing is people talk about the dark feminine as if she's just in her kindergarten state because that's what she's like when she first comes out. You have to learn how to work with her. I talk about this as that like this is a rite of passage that we don't get. And that's why I created Realm of the Dark Feminine because I was like, wouldn't it be nice if we had a space to practice these energies? Because most of the people around us are not ready to do this work yet. You guys who follow and subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media or are in my soul family, whatever, like we're here because we are way showers. If you don't understand that about yourself, please understand you are a way shower and you're here to go first. People around you likely aren't going to understand what you're doing. They might be triggered by it. They might have backlash. They might like you might receive backlash for it. That doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't correct. It means that you're just moving ahead of the collective consciousness because this is what has to happen. And in 30 years, everything I'm talking about will be old news because enough of us will have done this work that it would have created a ripple effect that basically created a pathway for everyone else to walk it in a much, um, I don't want to say much easier way, but in a way that they know more of what to expect. So Realm of the Dark Feminine I created because I wanted to create a space for us to practice this because otherwise we don't have a space. You're just doing it by yourself and like trial and error all the time. But if you come into an incubator of dark feminine energy, it's truly an initiation. You're coming in with me, who I've worked with this energy for at least 7 years myself and with clients, and for the last 3 years in this group format specifically. So you're also going to be around other women who are doing this same work. And you're going to be exposed to exactly how to work with these frequencies, but you're going to do it in your own unique, custom way based on your soul blueprint and what you are here for. And it's a system you can use over and over and over again. I do it with you every year. I shift and change so much from this program. This is why I know it's so phenomenal. So if you want a taste of it, I just did a master class last weekend called Evolution of the Dark Feminine. I'll put the link in the comments. You can buy that. It's $33. It was a phenomenal class. There's also a really, really amazing and beautiful Akashic Records journey at the end. It's like 3 hours in total. So you can watch that. And then that's actually serving as the introduction for Realm of the Dark Feminine. And if you decide you want to do that, you'll get a refund for the $33. We're starting September 1st. Doors are going to close September 5th. Our first group calls on the 7th. So if you want to join now because there's orientation materials for you to get started with. And there's also, I have a bunch of bonuses in there. Some of my older master classes, some of them are paid, some of them are free, but things that are helpful if you want to watch them before we start that will just give you some more context about the dark feminine and maybe how you want to work with her specifically. So there's a lot already available for you if you want to sign up now. You'll have some extra time to watch that before we officially start on September 7th with our opening ceremony call. So I'll have all the links for that in the comments below and in the description. And I hope that you join us. It's a really beautiful experience. But thank you so much for watching. If you're not able to join the program, I have a million videos on my YouTube channel that you can watch. They're not going to be obviously nearly the level of it. It's just information for you to receive. It's not an initiation in itself. People who have signed up for Realm of the Dark Feminine I've been getting emails from people like, oh my God, Allie, this already happened because this isn't like, oh, I'm learning how to make more money or, oh, I'm learning how to be radiant. It's like you're activating a massive part of yourself that is the storehouse of your power. So some big shit is going to happen when you make a decision to step into that in a deep way. And I just love hearing about how that happens every year. It's always like really magical and synchronistic and beautiful. So, anyways, I'm excited to see you guys there or to see you in the masterclass replay. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on the next video.